So everyone, again, thank you so much for joining this webinar today. This is a journey which we will be taking today's agenda. This is what is on our plate today for us. First, before we even get into understanding why should we split a big user story into smaller pieces, or what are the techniques which we recommend usually for the teams to break it. We want to also cover what is a conventional way of requirement flow, and what's the requirement verification versus validation mindset, and what is the user story generally. How did we start writing user stories, and then we will go into the actual topic of why is it a big story and how can we split it, and what are the anti-patterns with that. So taking you all ahead, the first topic, before even we go into techniques to split a user story, why should we split a big user story? Let's talk about, or let me walk you all through a conventional requirement flow. So what usually happens is there's a customer or a client or a set of people, product management team, who usually define the scope, right? And there's a set of business analysis team who detail it, or who writes a specification document for all the details or the requirements, right? And then what happens now, that understanding is then given to the leads or architects for designing, right? Being the architecture or be it the wireframes or visual designs. Then once that is done, it is passed to the development team itself, where the solution is implemented, right? And then once the development is done, there's also QC team for us verifying the requirement as to if the solution meets the requirement given by one person who's a customer or a client, or set of people who are product managers, right? So this is usually or generally the flow of requirements from the product team till the QC team. Now, once this is done, we also release it and make it available for the users itself, right? There's a famous picture which I've added here, which signifies or talks about the dilution of the purpose, or why or what part of the requirements as and when we proceed through these stages, right? So I just want to also mention a point here, which is verification or validation mindset. So I just want to do a small activity, everyone here, to walk you all through the verification and validation process, right? So this is what we are going to do. I will be acting as your customer or a client, and all you have to do is, if you have a pen and paper, I will start giving you requirements one by one. You all can draw it, or you all can use your imagination and you all can draw in your mind itself. But when I ask you, how does your product look, you all will have to input your data in the chat window. I hope this is understood. Follow my lead, everyone, right? Imagine I'm your customer. I come and tell, hey guys, I have a product idea, right? I want to build an automobile, right? Which can take a person or some goods from point A to point B. This is what the product I have in my mind, and I want you all to start developing it or imagining it or drawing it wherever you all can. Shall we start? I'm going to give you the first requirement, the first phase. If you all want to close your eyes and think of it, all yours, right? I want you all to build the base of the automobile with 4 wheels and axle, of course, to join them, right? The next requirement, we of course want an engine which can power these tires to move, right? Place an engine on the base which you have built. I'm giving you a third requirement. Imagine this. Place a body or the automobile body on the engine and the wheelbase, right? I want, as a customer, I'm telling you, I want a windshield, 2 seaters, right? Your body should contain all these, 2 windows, an AC, music player, and of course, we want a boot to carry luggage or whatever baggages, right? Now that you have imagined and built all these things in your mind, can you tell me, or can you enter in the chat window, what is your end product in your imagination looks like? I'm going to open the chat window with whatever requirement I gave you. What is the end product you imagine to be? Maybe a car, maybe a van. Absolutely. Very good. Car, a wagon, a two-seater. Brilliant, guys. Thank you so much for this. Now, at this point in time, guys, I want you to pay attention here. At this point in time, I, as a customer, gave you requirements and you all started building it, right? Now, what is the level of verification or checking we can do? When I ask you to present your car, you will obviously come and tell me 4 wheels, axle, engine is there. Yeah. Now there's also the body which you asked for, right? Very good. I, as a client or a customer or product manager, will say, yes, kudos team, very good, brilliant job. But there's another question, right? Am I right as a customer or am I right as a client? Y'all helped in verifying your requirement with me, but there's also one more aspect to it. Let's do the same activity again, guys, but a little different. Be with me, follow my lead. I got your product and I went to someone like a porter. Porter is a company in Bangalore or in India which helps moving goods or luggages from one place to another. Now, Porter told me, what product have you built? It doesn't suit my users, right? Now, let's do the same activity again. Follow my lead. I, as a customer, come and tell you, guys, we have got a Porter request. We want to build an automobile for drivers who can help move luggages from one place to another or boxes from one place to another. Now, be with me. Same steps. With this in place, with this in your mind, let's go with the first step, first requirement. My team, I want you to build first the base, that is 4 wheels and an axle. Imagine this again. The second requirement, we have to move heavy load stuff. So place an engine on the base, right? The third step, now that we know whom we are building it for, again, place a body on that where the major space is for the goods to carry and 2-seaters along with ACs and windshields, right? Now tell me, guys, what is your end product look like in your imagination? Pickup van, brilliant, Karthikeya. Pickup truck, good. Truck, very good. Very good. Truck. Oh yeah, brilliant, guys. Thank you so much for this. What really happened? What's the difference between the first activity which we did and the second activity which we did? There are 2 things which I got in, right? Now it's time for me to flaunt my jargons. I got in something called as user centricity, right? First time when we did the verification or the maximum level of check we could do is with me because I gave you the requirement, right? Now, correct, purpose someone is written already. Yes. Now that I bought in the user, 2 things happened. One is you as team also started thinking that way, right? The second and very important thing which happened was, apart from me, there is another layer of people whom we can check if this is what is needed. First case was verification, guys, where we checked if we have built the product based on the scope. But the second one, validation, is with the actual users. We are validating if that is what they want, right? Now with this, approach which we are moving towards because of agile or whatever, right? Where we can actually take each and every part and go to the users also along with me as a client to check if this is their demand, this is there, is this the purpose, is it solving? When you build the base, you can always go check with the users if it has to be increased or if the size has to be decreased. Now another thing, when you talk about building a body, right, the users may come and tell we drive on narrow roads, so we might have to change, or we might drive on wider roads, so we might have to build a bigger thing, bigger truck, right? So this is the change of mindset, which is from verification towards validation. And that, my team, is the reason why we write requirements in Agile in the form of user stories. A user story is a simple one-liner statement which is written with respect to a user's perspective. It has three parts. One is persona. Whom are we building it for? Need. What do they need? What is the demand? Why are we building it? Now, with this, one thing which opened up is validation of requirements or validation of the software built or the product built from the users directly. So that is what is, this is why, or this is the base idea of why we started writing requirements in the form of user stories in Agile itself. I'm going to hand over the baton to Sudha, who will talk about characteristics of user stories. Over to you, Sudha. Sudha, are you there?
Sudha, you are on mute.
Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Sujit, I think you missed the joke since I unmuted myself. I was trying to imagine a porter truck or an automated four-wheel rickshaw kind of a thing while you were giving the example. That was a good one. Okay, so you heard Sujit talking about the genesis of a user story, why a user story came into picture, and what is a best practice to write a user story. Just saw a small template over there. So I'm not going to dwell too much into that. As a user, as a persona, I want to be able to fulfill the purpose so that my demand is met. Yeah? So that's what we saw in the previous slide. Now this brings us to our next slide. I'm going to dwell a couple of minutes on this one. I'm sure all of you know what Invest is all about, but just benefit of this particular session, I would like to spend a couple of minutes here, and also in the later slides, I would like to relate it to I would like to relate the story slicing techniques with this particular Invest slide. When we get there, we'll talk about that. But here, these are the 6 attributes a good user story must possess. You would have written a user story based on the template you've just seen with a persona in mind. But then there are other things also that you have to bear in mind when writing a good user story. And the acronym INVEST stands for that. What does it look like or sound when it's expanded? Independent. When you're writing user stories, ensure that you minimize the dependencies among the stories or between the stories which are in your backlog. Now, the reason you want to do that is it helps you as a product owner, it helps you to prioritize the user story if the dependencies are limited to a very low level. Along with that, when writing user stories, keep in mind that you have to be able to easily order them, easily able to prioritize them. That automatically gets you into the mindset of making a user story independent. You can't avoid it, but what I'm trying to say is minimize it. Secondly, Agile is all about collaboration, communication. So when building a user story, collaborate, bring business, bring developers together, bring a lot of communication, collaboration between these two sides to make your user story more meaningful. And every user story, as you all know, is customer centric. It has to have some value to it. It should be valuable. Whatever money and time you're investing in it should be valuable. Now, when you're building a user story, the dev team should be able to tell the size of the story, the amount of effort and the time that goes into it. They should be able to tell exactly. It should not be like when they look at the story, oh, I don't know how much time it's going to take. I don't know how big this is. That's not the kind of reactions we should look out for as coaches. when the product owner is writing the user story. They should be small enough so that you're able to deliver that within an iteration, which is of a 2-week or a week or a 3-week iteration, whatever be the duration of your sprint. It should be deliverable within that particular duration of time. It's not just some product or some user story which is demonstrable, but it should be testable. At the end of it, we just heard what Sujit said. It should be testable. You should verify the conditions that you're set within a user story, the set of conditions a particular requirement must meet, so that you know you've met the expectations of the customer. So in other words, it should be testable. So these are the 6 characteristics a good user story must possess. At least majority of them should be there when you're writing a user story. And when you're splitting the user story, and every time you split a big story into smaller stories, please bear in mind, look back and say, okay, do I have at least few of these in my user story? That'll be a good start for writing a user story, or to making a user story a better one. This is Sujit, sorry. This is the core of our session. Why we are spending our 1 hour here? This is the core topic. The reasons to split a story. So we're going to spend some time on this particular slide. I'm also going to take you through a few examples talking about the benefits of splitting a story. What are the problems you will face if you don't split a story, using some examples. So why do you have to split a story? Before we get there, splitting is nothing but, splitting or slicing, whatever you want to call it, is nothing but disaggregating a bigger requirement into smaller ones. In management terms, project management terms, they would call it as a product breakdown. Here we're going to use a word, user story slicing. You want to break them down into smaller stories. That is user story slicing. Now the question comes to, why should we split a story? At a very high level, we want to split a user story so that we are able to deliver a user story within a duration of time, within a sprint duration. That's the crux of it. We want to make it smaller, a bigger story to smaller stories, so that you're able to deliver it within your sprint duration. Now you may wonder, why should I deliver it within a sprint duration? Again, we all know the principles of agile. We want a faster feedback from the customer, right? We don't want to wait a considerable amount of time going back to the drawing board and making course correction. Also, we want to deliver something really frequently. If they're small, you're able to deliver it frequently. If they're small, you're able to deliver in a shorter intervals of time. You would like to deliver frequently at shorter intervals of time. Along with that, you want to deliver not just some small user story, but some meaningful and valuable user stories. Also, what you should bear in mind is, every time you deliver these user stories incrementally, frequently, okay, you are allowing the customer to visualize and come up with different perspectives. So every time you demonstrate these smaller user stories to the customer, you're allowing them to visualize and come up with different perspectives, allowing you to get a better feedback, or I would say an effective feedback, and helping us to do course correction in an agile way. That is another reason why you would like to split a user story. Now, this is from a customer side, right? How does the dev team feel when they're working with a smaller user stories? When they're working with smaller user stories, so they split a bigger one into smaller user stories, they're able to deliver really faster. So the sense of accomplishment for the team is really high when they're delivering and they're closing these stories within the sprint duration. So that in turn boosts the team's morale, which is really needed. And that also leads to intrinsic motivation of the team members within your dev team. Along with that, what happens when you're splitting the stories is, apart from getting faster feedback, you're also, because the stories are really small, you're able to surface the issues, the constraints that the story has, which in turn means you're able to deliver them, or you're able to fix them faster and deliver them faster. Along with that, you're also able to predict when you're going to finish it, being a smaller story. Yeah, so the predictability increases, the flow increases, you're able to identify the issues better. Also, the sense of motivation, accomplishment is also very high when you are splitting a user story. Now, what kind of stories are candidates for splitting would be our next question. So yes, obviously, you would want to you definitely want to, or obviously want to split a big story. Now, what is a big story? A big story is something which constitutes of smaller stories, inherently big. It has smaller stories to it. It's called as a compound story. Now, what happens when you deal with such big stories? When you deal with such big stories, yeah, you may not be able to finish on time. That's one portion, one part of it. Second type of story that you would come across in your projects, it would be a complex story. A complex story is where, okay, it is big, fine, but not much of effort would go in it. But then there are a lot of things which are complicated or complex, something to do with the technology. It could be probably you're moving from a new technology, from Angular technology to a newer technology, and you would like to, you don't know much about it. It's a complex one, or the process that you're looking at is complex. So this is another situation you have to deal with, wherein you will have to split that particular story as well to make your life easier. The third scenario that you might encounter is when you face a lot of unknowns. When you have a lot of unknowns, implementation becomes very difficult. So these are the kind of situations that you must watch out for, or these are the kind of stories that you must watch out for. And these stories, or in these situations, you would want to consider splitting the story into smaller stories. Now, the slide that we are currently seeing talks about some examples. I would like to pick up these examples to be able to relate to the points that we just discussed. So the first one example is a property search. And here, this is something that we being dealing with with our client. So they are the ones who are building the portal like your Magic Bricks or your 99 Acres. Here, one of the requirement was the user should be able to search the properties listed on the website. That looks very simple for the dev team. But then when they get into it, when they start brainstorming with the customer, they realize, okay, what kind of people will be looking out for property? Then you come out with people like, oh, there will be tenants who might want to look out for the property to switch to a new property, or there'll be people who would like to buy a property, or there could be letting agents who want to post their properties or search for other properties in the area, or it could be students, or it could be people from different cities who are looking for temporary accommodation, would like to look for properties. And there, all of this makes this property search requirement a huge requirement. And now this becomes a compound story. The dev team might feel, oh, it's a simple one, no big deal. But then there's a lot of effort that goes into it because it's a big one. It constitutes of smaller functionalities. Although you would have built the entire functionality, you might not have enough time in your sprint duration to test it. That's one scenario. Which means that the team could be demotivated because they couldn't finish such a simple story just because we didn't have enough of bandwidth. That leads to a spillover. The second example is along the same lines. When you're searching for a property, when you have to search for a property, you'd like to make a payment to use the services, right? And the payment should be made through a credit card. Pay by a credit card. Now, this looks easy, but the team is intimidated with the story. The reason is, oh, we've never worked with the credit card processing systems. How does the host connect? What should be the messages? We are not very sure about. So there's a level of complexity in this particular story. Although paying by card may be easy, but the credit card processing system or the process could be difficult for them or complicated for them. This is another example wherein they say, okay, it's complex, so don't know whether we can complete it. And if we don't complete, we can't even showcase it to the customer, and we lose an opportunity of feedback. So that's another scenario which talks about a complex story. This one, I'm not techie here, but then this is an example that you might have encountered. This is not really, this is something technical example. So there's an application which has got a lot of activities for the database. You want to create a database, replicate a database, upgrade a database using an API. So one portion of it is you click and then you need to upgrade the database to a newer version. You have done this in the past, but then the team feels there are a lot of unknowns. Okay, there might be other aspects which are very clear, but then how does the system behave when you upgrade? What are the changes at the OS level that are needed? What are the changes that are needed at the application level? These are some areas which you are not sure about. So you don't want to get into it and start exploring it. Instead, you would rather choose a POC kind of a thing so that you get to know of all the unknowns and then go into actual implementation, right? So these are a few examples that you can relate to, which will form the reasons for splitting a story, either complex or filled with uncertainties, or a compound story. Yeah. So this leads us to the next topic, which Sujit will talk about in a minute. Over to you, Sujit.
Thank you so much, Sudha. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So everyone, I think Sudha just clearly mentioned that big stories or small stories, the reason why we call it big, it could be because it's complex, it could be because it's taking too much effort, or it could also be the reason why it's spilling across, right? Now, when I talk about a big story, as Sudha mentioned, these are the few possibilities why it's also a big story. Let's see, when we talk about breaking this big story into smaller pieces, what do usually teams tend to do, or what do we kind of recommend, right? Uh, Requirements or user stories come in different sizes. Smaller user story gets finished in less time. Bigger user stories may spill across multiple sprints, right? Let's take a very good example. Maybe probably this is the first user story which any project would start with, right? I've given a very simple example. The story here is, as a consumer, I must be able to log in so that I can make the purchase. Take an example of Amazon for that matter, right? And these are the acceptance criteria, and we have 9 acceptance criteria, right? One is user must be able to log in with valid credentials. Error must be thrown for empty fields and invalid credentials. Password must be 8 letters long. Password must contain at least these special characters and number. User must also validate with CAPTCHA, right? And email, user must be able to retrieve the password. Email has to be sent to retrieve the password. And there's also an NFR, non-functional requirement, which is 500 users must be able to log in, right? Now, say for example, this is a very big story which I give as a product manager, right? And we take it to the planning meeting and we break it into what? Subtasks, right? Now, of course, to deliver this as a working software, you need backend team to create their rules, to create their APIs. And there's obviously a front-end team, okay, which is building the UI, the visual designs, and also integrating the APIs with the UI. There's testing team, which will also perform their skill set, right? Now, when you talk about agile teams, there should be a cross-functional team which can deliver a requirement into a working software, right? The first and easiest way is to, again, split this with respect to skill set or technology, right? This is the most common anti-pattern which we observe during our transformation, and I'm sure most of your teams are already doing this, right? The moment we see a big story which we cannot maybe complete in a sprint, let's do a backend story. Let's create a backend story. Let's create a front-end story and QA story. What happens here is the subtasks are broken down, and for those respective subtasks, a skill set level or a technological level user story is created. Imagine this. Why is this an anti-pattern, right? Let's say backend story is completed and front-end story is 50% done, is what we will be trying to achieve in this sprint, and QA will be taking up in the next sprint. At the end of the sprint, maybe because you wanted to fill your capacity, maybe you wanted to show your management that we are working on this, you broke your user story like this. But at the end of the sprint, what is that you're actually validating? What were we supposed to validate? Isn't this was something which we are supposed to validate? Right? That's the whole purpose of Scrum, right? You plan something, you validate against it, right? Whereas if you deliver this, if you break your user stories in this format, say your backend story is completed, front-end story is completed, right? What is that you're delivering? Can you validate that? Can a user use it? Can we demo it? Even if we demo it, what is the feedback you get? Because QA is not done, your feedback you get is obviously the bugs. Do you want that feedback, or do you want to see if that is what makes sense to the user? Right? So this, my team or folks, is horizontal slicing, and this is an anti-pattern, right? Imagine going to a restaurant and eating a burger. What if the restaurant serves you the bread first? Eat the bread and I will give you the salad, cheese, and the cucumber first. Second, then at the end, I will give you the third layer. Is that how we eat? Do we enjoy such kind of, eating a burger? Definitely not, right? So what we recommend, or what is the best possible way to break a big story? Obviously not the horizontal or technical or skill set based. 1 minute, I'm just going to the next slide. This, probably this, right? I've taken the same example. As a consumer, I must be able to log in. Probably it's the first user story which any project builds. Now, if you observe the acceptance criteria here, right, and the subtasks, obviously, if we cannot deliver the entire bit of acceptance criteria, can we at least break this and just deliver the login page? Just deliver the CAPTCHA part separately. Just deliver the password retrieval. What you're actually trying to do here is you're not going with respect to skill set. You're breaking it with respect to the acceptance criteria itself. For example, the same story I have broken down into 4 smaller stories. First one, as a consumer, I must be able to log in with valid credentials so that I can make a purchase. It's a small part of the big story. And even the subtasks are less, which a team can deliver in a sprint, maybe, right? The second one, as a consumer, I must be able to retrieve any password. Now, this is another small part of the acceptance criteria, which again includes backend, UI, and test. Again, it's a logical breaking of the big user story involving the cross-functional team, but the amount of work when you have to deliver this versus the entire thing is obviously less, right? The third example, as a system, I must validate the authenticity of the user with the CAPTCHA. Now, what I've done is I've taken this 6th acceptance criteria and broken down into smaller pieces that can be separately delivered, right? Why are we doing this? Why do we need logical breaking into smaller pieces? Imagine this team. Even if you're not able to deliver entire thing, right, which may spill over, can we break it into logical pieces? If not for all these 4 stories, at least can we deliver completely these things? In the first slide, the slide before this, what was the intention? Here, the intention was sense of accomplishment, maybe. Yes, we completed at least the backend story. But here, in this example, where we broke into smaller pieces with respect to acceptance criteria, the sense we get is sense of doneness, not accomplishment. Sense of doneness. At least if we are not able to validate or get feedback for the entire thing, we can at least get feedback for these two stories which are functional, which can be delivered because there are less tasks involved, and it's a maybe simpler, fairly simpler stories when compared to the entire big story. And here we are not delivering only the UI part for this login or for CAPTCHA. We are delivering the entire working software, which is including your backend, your front end, and maybe different skill set included, right? So this is the recommended ways of splitting a big story into a smaller story, which is logical breaking with respect to acceptance criteria. Very simple, very straightforward. Notice your acceptance criteria. If your big story has multiple functionalities within it, do not hesitate, break it into smaller pieces and get at least a few feedback for those which are completed in a sprint. This is the simplest way to split your user story, big user story, into smaller pieces. Again, this is one of the simplest way, and this is the first way which I told you. This is not over. Have you heard of the technique called Spider or the framework called Spider? It has a lot of techniques which will help us breaking a user story, big user story, into smaller techniques. Don't get freaked out with the spider image here. Okay, anyway, so we will explain this in detail and come back to the slide. and techniques to split. There are several ways, or there's a lot of techniques which will help you split a big user story into smaller stories. First is spikes in Spider S. Second one is P, platforms or personas. Next one, I, interfaces, which are nothing but your platforms. D, data types, and R is for rules. We will explain with examples, guys. I will take you to a mind map which we have prepared, which will give you more insights. So the first vertical slicing which we saw, which was with respect to acceptance criteria. Lot of acceptance criteria which has multiple functionalities, break it into smaller pieces and deliver it as soon as possible. Sudha, I'm passing the baton to you. You want to take up the first one?
Yes, Sujit. So thank
Guys,
you.
can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, I can, Sujit.
Okay.
Yes. I'm unmuted as well. All right, Sujit.
Yes, Sudha, go ahead.
Okay. So guys, you just saw the vertical slicing and horizontal slicing. I also spoke about the invest, right? Since we are talking about how to do the splitting or slicing, one thing to bear in mind, when you split a story and when you form those the teeny weeny stories from a bigger story, ensure every story has at least few of the attributes. The maximum attributes, the better it is, but then try to make it, try to ensure that the user stories are having all those 6 attributes. It's very difficult to have all the 6 attributes. Sometimes they are interdependent, I would say, but then at least they should be valuable, testable. Yeah. So bear in mind those underlying attributes when after you split the story, see if it meets them. Now, we heard about a big story. We heard about a complex story. We also heard about a story filled with unknowns, right? So we spoke about those situations wherein splitting is needed, but also we also will talk about how to split those stories. One big story can be split into small constituent stories. That is one way of splitting. So when you look at the story, figure out what way can be split. What kind of a story is it? There's no complexity. We know everything about it. So does it have smaller functionalities within it? If it does, then which technique should I use is our next topic. Then look at a story. Okay, is it a complex story? It's team feeling that there are a lot of areas which look very intimidating to them. They might struggle implementing them. Then it becomes a complex story. So the best thing is don't invite those stories into your sprint backlog. Instead, split the story into 2 parts. One, you would have heard about a spike or an exploratory story, wherein the team picks up the slices the story, picks up a story called as an exploratory story or a spike, does all their analysis, comes up with their findings, gets comfortable with the stories, okay, ensures that they reduce the level of complexity within the story. Once they are comfortable, they will move on to the actual implementation. The advantage of splitting this is instead of taking the entire story and leading it to failure, you are prioritizing between these 2 stories. One is the spike story and the other is the story. Once you find answers, okay, you have bandwidth and you feel that can be completed within a sprint, you pull into the current sprint, or you can, your product owner may choose to have this particular story, the actual function story, into the next sprint. If you have unknowns, the same approach can be used. Do a POC. So have a story for a POC, and the actual implementation of the functionality can be another story as well. So this is another way of splitting the stories. Now, when you split, or how do you split stories which have other functionalities? What do we have to look for? I mean, what are the indicators along which will let us know along which lines or which technique should I use to split? So first of all, let's look at this one. We saw a property search example. In the property search example, what we saw was, okay, there are different type of people or different types of users who would be looking for properties. Yeah. And these are nothing but user roles, or what we call as personas. So there will be people like students, or there'll be users who are willing to buy a property, looking to search for a property to buy, looking to search for a property to rent. Now, they all have different expectations. They all have different needs. So that's why they're searching for a property. So you would want to break that particular story, property search, into various constituent stories. As a tenant, I would like to search for a property to rent out. As an owner or as an individual, I would like to search for a property to buy, and so on and so forth. That is splitting the story along the lines of user roles and personas. For that, you need to brainstorm and see what are the other users, who are the other people or individuals who are going to be impacted, okay, who are going to make use of this functionality, and what are their needs. And that's how you derive at user roles or personas. The second one we'll look at is workflows. Now, you all might be aware of workflows, series of activities for a transaction to take place. Now, if you look at this example of account management, the other, sorry, I just missed a top example there. It's also about the same thing. As a user, you'd like to send or receive mails, but there'll be different types of people. Some might be using the story to send and receive, send a mail, compose a mail. Some would be just opening up the mail and reading the mail. So you might want to split the story along the personas of a student and a receiver. Also, you would want your system to send about X number of mails, or 500 or 600 mails without crashing. Okay, that's the purpose there. That's the demand there. I should not crash. So here, a slight twist, apart from actual human beings as user roles, we can also have a persona, a system persona. So as a system, I should be able to send out 500 mails so that and end up not breaking down. That's the expectation. So that's one way of breaking. The one that I was about to get into, but I went back to the previous example, was a workflow. So if you look at this user story, it's about account management. What do I want to do with my account? I should be able to manage my account. What are the various things I would like to do with the account? I would like to probably edit my details. I would like to probably put up a picture, change my address, add some notes about the individual, lots of things, or change the password very frequently. So these things come out when you're brainstorming with your stakeholders. So when you know this is a workflow and it looks big, okay, managing my account looks very simple, but what are the various aspects that go into managing the account is what you need to consider. So once you identify those aspects of the workflow in turn become stories. So if you look at the right-hand side portion, let me minimize. Yeah. As a consumer, I might want to configure my account. As a consumer, I might want to update my profile picture. So again, over here, I would like to give a small twist. Not just a consumer, somebody who is renting, somebody who is building the system, probably the admin. Admin also might want to put some restrictions on the account. So what I did here was I went into workflow. I broke it down into workflow of configuration, updating my profile picture, changing my password, upgrading my account. And then I'm just racking my brain. Who else will manage the account? Yeah, the guys who own the account, right? They might be the admins. Yeah, even they will be in control of the account. So even they will have some of their own workflows. So again, that becomes another story. So here, although I went into workflows, I again thought along the lines of personas and I further broke it down. Okay. The next one I would like to talk about is the operations. Operations are what you perform, the activities that you perform on the software, on a particular data, right? Quite straightforward. Now, the CRUD is just an acronym for creation, deletion, updation, and reading, read-only views. What would you like to do with the data? Profile management. I would just like to add something. I would like to update my picture. I would like to delete the picture from my account. I would like to just keep it on read-only mode. These are the various operations. So this is the simplest one when you see the word like as account manager, as an admin. I want to manage something. You know that, okay, management of work or data means it could be probably addition, deletion, modification, or amendment, or replicating, or duplicating, or replicating, amendment. All these are operations that you have in place for a particular data. So you could break along these different operations that you have in place. So here, as an example, as a consumer, I want to manage my profile. I want to add a profile. I want to delete a profile. I want to update my profile picture. I want to just keep it in a view mode only. I want to lock it. So that's another way of breaking your user stories. Whatever be the technique you're using, the point here you have to bear in mind is, if you think these are the only 4 operations you could have for a consumer, switch your mind and say, okay, are there any other personas who are going to work on my profile picture or on my data or on my account? Yes, there are other personas. Again, identify those personas, create stories for them. While doing that, what else? What is the acceptance criteria for each of these individuals, right? For a particular admin guy, he should be able to change the password. He should be able to delete or update an account. Okay, not just the consumer, but then he's got all rights. Then again, you would want to play around with the acceptance criteria of that particular story, which was built based on a persona, and further split it along the lines of acceptance criteria. So these are few ways, I would say not few ways, multiple ways of splitting. All you have to do is, first, let me get the complex work out or the simplest work out. Get the story, which is very simple, one way of looking at it, and build more complicated ones over it. Second is branch it out in terms of operations or in terms of personas or in terms of the smaller constituent stories. That's also fine. And there are other techniques. I think Sujit would love to take them up.
Right. Thank you, Sudha. I think Sudha covered breaking the stories with respect to personas based on workflows and operations, which is CRUD basically, right? There are other ways as well. Like, for example, if you're building the same functionality for different interfaces or different set of users, like, for example, iOS, Android, web. So one possible or one way of breaking them is also with respect to platform. Right, so you can break the same story, which let's take an example here. As a user, I must be able to send or receive emails, right? If it's the same functionality which you're building for iPhones and Android or web browser, you might as well break them separately, because when you talk about platforms, the navigation pattern or the user interface also might vary, right? So you might want to take you might want to validate iOS build or iOS product with respect to iOS set of people, right? So one way is, again, if you're using multiple platform or if your product is targeted for multiple platform, break it with respect to platforms as well. Again, acceptance criteria, we took a big example in the slides, which is vertical slicing. If your acceptance criteria, this is the simplest. The acceptance criteria is the first method or the simplest method which will help you break big user story into smaller ones. You can collate similar acceptance criteria and break it down into smaller pieces. For example, here, login with password. As a consumer, I want to log in with valid credentials. Password, these are the acceptance criteria. Error must be thrown and empty field validations are here, right? This can be broken down. Again, these are just examples which we are giving so that you can also utilize this in your actual products as well. So as a consumer, I must be able to enter a password which is 8 letters long. So that is a very small piece of the entire story, but that itself can be given to a user and taken feedback from, right? And as a consumer, I must receive an error when the password criteria is not met, right? So if this becomes a very big story, acceptance criteria level breaking down, which will help us deliver smaller user stories, can also be done. Another technique is data type. Imagine, I hope everyone uses WhatsApp, and there's a big feature in WhatsApp, which is sharing your multimedia, right? Imagine how long WhatsApp would have taken to build the entire story if it was one story, right? So what I mean here is data types is, of course, another technique which will help you break a big story into smaller stories. Here, I've added a very realistic and practical example, adding attachments, right? As a consumer, I must be able to send attachments in an email, right? Now, the attachments here can be of various data types, right? One can be a photo, the other can be a PDF, the other can be an Excel sheet, the other can be a video, right? So if you have multiple data types, you might as well break them into separate pieces and deliver and take feedback, right? Business rules is another interesting technique which will help you break a big story into smaller stories. Again, I hope everyone uses a banking application, or everyone must have filled an application for insurance, right? The moment you hit do you smoke button, when you check, there's a screen which opens, or you're directed to somewhere else, right? Those are rules. Those are business rules. The behavior of app changes with respect to logic, right? So if your product has a lot of these rules, you might as well break a big story into smaller one with respect to each and every rule. I've just given a very simple example here as well. Depending upon the user account mode, I must be able to use or not use a feature, right? Very generic. When the user turns on the kid mode, user must not be able to send an email, right? This, again, if these are your rules, I have two rules here and I have broken each rule as one user story, right? So folks, these are the few techniques which will help you break a big user story into smaller user stories. But there's also a very important technique above and beyond all these techniques, right? Which is your gut feeling, right? These are not defined, or these are not the final template of techniques which will help you. You can mix and match these. You can use any permutation and combination, and use your gut feel also to break a big story into smaller stories. Again, with stressing on what Sudha mentioned, the idea here is not to fill the capacity or show the management. The idea here, as we discussed with the activity which we did, is to get feedback from the customer. Your sprint duration will never change, but your requirement will change, right? If it's a big, small requirement, you can finish in one sprint. If it's a big requirement, break it into smaller pieces logically, where you can deliver something which is a working software to your customers or your consumers and get feedback from. Just want to also ensure that is the whole purpose of doing agile, and that's the whole purpose of writing a requirement in terms of user stories. And had Nokia or BlackBerry kept user in the center building their products, they would have still maybe in the race of mobile phones. They just built, of course, they built quality products, but the product which they built was not very attractive or usable to the user. That's when Android kicked in with smartphones, right? So keep your users.
We have a question as well in the chat. Omi is asking, is the gut feeling of the PO or the Scrum team?
It is the Scrum team, and along with the PO, Omi, right? Product owner or PO gives the direction, but the call of how much can be delivered or what can be delivered is solely taken by the Scrum team. Now, again, when I say Scrum team, it is in consensus with product team, product owner. It's a collective decision which people take, which we recommend people to take.
Yeah, sure, ahead, Omi. Probably you can unmute yourself and ask directly.
Okay. Hi, and thanks a lot for giving time and actually letting me speak. I'll just come straight to the point. Is like no, we are talking about these user stories. Okay, so while no, supposedly we are creating a completely new product, and a product owner is actually going ahead and creating those user stories. So these techniques and all of this might not necessarily be applicable then. So in that case, this gut feeling part especially, or for that matter, even these techniques, should they actually be employed at a later stage during sprint planning, or maybe towards when you're going for user story, the backlog refinement or something like that?
Yes, Omi, as I told, if your team is already doing a smaller stories, what do we recommend as an ideal size of a story, which can be delivered at the end of the sprint? If your sprint duration is 2 weeks, if you can finish it, it's okay. If your team is already doing that, what I mean is, if teams are breaking the smaller stories into smaller pieces, well and good. What we're trying to tell is, the moment you're stuck telling that, the moment your team comes back to you and tells, this is a big story we can't deliver in one sprint, or this might spill over, right? You can utilize these. It's not about when to use it. The answer to your question is it a later part or is it an initial part? I would answer in a way that Whenever you get stuck, whenever your team gets stuck or tell you that this cannot be delivered in one sprint, you can use any of these.
I think to add to that, what Sujit said, Domi, it's all about just-in-time planning, right? Agile is all about just-in-time planning. You do a discovery, you come up as a product owner along with your product team and your team members. You'd have done a discovery, you would have placed a high-level placeholders for the user stories. Now, do you want to break down all the stories there itself with the product owner? I don't think so. That's the right time, because you don't want to take every story which is part of the journey and break it down. The best thing over there at that point in time when you're in sprint zero would be just take up those stories as a product owner, prioritize, take those stories that are going to go into the next two sprints, first and the second sprint backlog, and then figure out with the team, are they big? If they are big, go about splitting them. Again, you have answered the question, you have answered the question yourself. Yes, you have backlog refinements. We know the principle behind backlog refinement is having your backlogs of next two sprints ahead in time, right? You need to have two sprints of backlog at any given point in time. So the refinement also is one of the best time to split the stories, because it follows the principle of just in time. Yeah, again, to add to the same point, yeah. But is it a candidate for splitting is the question you need to ask.
So before we take further questions, I know it is 7:33 and people are leaving. Thank you, everyone for participating. I've shared some links in the chat window. Please do share your feedback, and also let us know, any topics that you would want us to take in upcoming webinars. You can reach out to me at alok@benzene.com. Also follow us on our LinkedIn page for more blogs, articles, videos, etc. And we are okay to continue if there are further questions. So please bring them on.
Okay, so I'll be very quick here. So just one question that I want to ask is, you have very well explained about how we should slice the story. So I would like to know when we should do the, you can say, that task and subtask with the story.
Right. So Manjeet, breaking a user story into subtask level happens in the planning meeting on day one of the sprint.
Okay, I'm listening. Yeah.
Yes, Sudha and Sujit, I'm just trying to, there's just one thing that I am a little bit confused on. See, when we talk about, backlog refinement or something, that's when we are actually into one of your sprints. Okay. What when we are actually starting, this is probably my first sprint that I'm getting into. Okay, at that particular point of time, I think the best time, I'm just trying to get a understanding, would the first sprint planning be good enough? Because at that point of time we don't have enough time to actually go ahead and see the user stories, whether this is big enough or not. We are just going through it during the planning meeting. So would that be the correct time to actually go ahead and probably have a look at it, or is there something like a sprint zero?
Yes,
so that's a little bit.
Yeah, actually you answered your question, but let me explain, right? So Omi, what we generally recommend this journey for any agile projects to start, right? First, we do something called as discovery session, where we kind of understand the story map and convert the ideas which come into user stories, right? If you're doing discovery session, if you find out that these are big stories, that's first step that's the first opportunity for you to break into smaller stories. Second option, if you don't do a discovery session, your backlog creation happens separately other than discovery session. You mentioned it, sprint zero. Sprint zero is a sprint where we kind of prepare ourselves to start development, right? So mid of sprint zero, we obviously do the refinement for the first sprint, right? So that is another second opportunity for you to break a story into smaller stories. Did you answer your question, Omi?
Yes, you did actually. The only thing was I was a bit confused because my very first project when I did start, there was not something that's sprint zero was not taken into consideration, and it was like a very hustle thing. No, it just came up. They had some user stories that they were put in, and then probably it was the first time that we were actually getting into the agile transformation. And and FSD was directly converted into smaller user stories, and then no, we had to start right away. So that was where a little bit of confusion was there, and so that was something I wanted to actually verify, or you can say validate with you all, whether what we are doing is correct or not.
See, there's no. I will not answer yes or no, with, right or wrong with that, Omi. I will recommend one thing, right? So if you don't do sprint zero and you directly start a sprint where you don't have time to groom, right? Those points obviously will come in a retrospective, right? Guys, we
Yep.
have long, big stories. We have to break it down, right? There's always an opportunity for you to correct it in the next sprint. Again, why are we sprinting? To continuously improve the product and the team and the process, right?
Correct. Yeah, thank you so much, guys.
Guys, I just want to also mention one point here. The same topic, we have published a detailed blog on Benzene website. Please do visit our website, and there are a lot of blogs where we come with the practitioners or very raw data, which will help you relate to more of what you guys do, right? So please do visit our website, and even the same topic we have written as a blog and published it. That will also help you give more details.
Great. So do we have any other questions? I think you covered the topic well, Sujit. People don't have doubts now, so good for
Either
us.
that or people didn't understand, Alok.
No, you can say that the way you describe and the way you present it is simply awesome, man. Thank you so much for everything, man.
Thank you everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Manjeet. Thank you. Please
Thank you.
do leave these feedbacks on our Google as well, because that matters a lot to us. And thank
Sure.
you everyone again, for joining. Thanks, Manjeet. Thanks
you.
everyone, and have
Thanks,
a great.
Sudhir. Thanks, Sudha.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Sujit and Sudha, for a wonderful session.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Thank you.